My name is Thelma, and I am 58 years old. This past Saturday, I stood on the manicured lawn of the Willow Creek Estate, a place I would have never chosen for myself, surrounded by 200 white hydrangeas and the low hum of a string quartet. I was supposed to become not just a mother, but a mother-in-law. My heart felt like an overfilled balloon swollen with a pride so fierce and desperate, it threatened to pop with every beat. Through a large arched window, I could see my son Jeremy, my only child, laughing with his best man. He was adjusting the cufflinks that belonged to his father, his smile so bright and unguarded, it seemed to hold all the sunlight of that June afternoon. I thought of my late husband Michael, a practical man who built bookshelves and believed in quiet promises, and I sent a silent wish into the ether that he could see the wonderful kind man his boy had become. Everything in that moment was a picture of perfect happiness, a canvas painted with everything a mother dreams of for her child. Yet beneath the satin of my mother, of the groom dress, a tiny cold knot of unease had nestled just under my ribs for months. I had named it a mother's foolish clinging, the irrational fear of being replaced. I told myself to bury it. Cassandra was flawless, poised successful, and Jeremy, my Jeremy, was incandescent with joy. That was supposed to be all that mattered. Needing a moment to collect the pieces of my own emotions to breathe in something that was not gardenia perfume or other people's champagne laughter, I slipped away from the pre-ceremony bustle. I found a narrow, cool hallway lined with somber portraits of people I did not know, a forgotten artery of the grand estate. It was quiet there, the thick carpet swallowing all sound. And that was when I heard her voice calm and clear as polished glass seeping from a slightly open door marked bridal suite. What I heard in the next 60 seconds did not just break my world, it shattered the lens through which I viewed my son's future and forced me to rebuild my definition of love from the foundation up. Before I tell you what words traveled through that door and froze the blood in my veins, I am curious. Where are you listening from right now? If you have ever had a moment where a whisper of intuition screamed louder than a room full of reason, I want you to type the word intuition in the comments below. And if you want to understand how a mother's most painful silence became her child's greatest shield, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. What I learned in that hallway is a story about listening not with your ears, but with your soul. And then having the courage to wait for the right moment to speak. For 2 years, I had a front row seat to my son's transformation. He met Cassandra at a gallery opening for a mutual friend, a world of abstract paintings and intellectual chatter that was far from my world of flour and oven timers. He called me the next day, his voice buoyant in a way I had not heard since before his father passed. "Mom, I met someone. She's different." Different, I soon learned, meant a master's degree in business, a consultancy that commanded rates I could not fathom, and a personal style so impeccably curated, it looked effortless. When I finally met her over a deliberately casual brunch, I understood the pull. She was mesmerizing. She listened to Jeremy talk about the sustainable housing project he was drafting, with a focus so intense, it made him feel like the only person in the room. She asked me thoughtful questions about my bakery Thelma's hearth and remembered my mention of a fondness for peonies showing up the next visit with a magnificent bouquet. She made a concerted effort. She joined us for our simple Sunday dinners, always bringing a bottle of wine she had researched to pair with whatever I was making, and she would roll up the sleeves of her elegant blouse to help dry the dishes without a hint of condescension. I watched my son, who had carried a gentle sadness since losing his dad, begin to unfurl. The quiet, sometimes overly serious young architect became lighter, filled with plans that stretched beyond blueprints to vacations, home designs, and even baby names. He talked about building a foundation, a real legacy. Slowly, my defenses began to crumble. Maybe my initial chill was just the ancient primal fear of letting my only child go into the arms of another woman. So I leaned in. I shared family stories, the silly ones about Jeremy as a boy, the poignant ones about Michael, and I told them about Walter. My brother-in-law, Walter, was a kind, solitary soul, who built a chain of successful hardware stores from a single rented garage. He never married, had no children, and Jeremy was his only nephew, the son he never had. When Walter passed from a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, he left the bulk of his estate to Jeremy. The instructions in his will were simple: for Jeremy to help him build a stable and joyful married life. It was a staggering act of love, a safety net woven with hope. When I mentioned it to Cassandra, she had placed a graceful hand over Jeremy's and smiled. "That is so incredibly generous of him," she said, her tone perfectly balanced between gratitude and detachment. "But Jeremy and I are building our own future. We have our careers, our ambitions. That money is a wonderful gift, but it is just that, a gift. It does not define us." Her dismissal felt like a relief, a sign she was not after his money. In a gesture that felt like sealing a pact, I took her to my bedroom and opened my jewelry box. I gave her my own mother's lace handkerchief, a delicate heirloom of Irish linen to carry as her something old. I was not just giving her cloth. I was handing over a piece of my history, symbolically welcoming her into the fold. The cracks when they first appeared were so fine, they could have been tricks of the light. They began about 6 weeks before the wedding, as the plans shifted from collaborative to commanding. The venue was the first sign. Jeremy and I had spent a weekend driving through the countryside a year prior, and he had fallen in love with a converted barn at a family-owned farm. It was warm, rustic, and filled with the genuine charm of twinkling lights and wildflower fields. We had put down a deposit. Then one evening, Cassandra announced she had found the perfect place, the Willow Creek Estate. It was a modern marvel of glass and steel, a venue featured in luxury magazines. The cost was triple. When Jeremy, ever the pragmatist, voiced a gentle concern about the budget, she had leaned forward, her eyes sparkling not with excitement, but with strategy. "Darling, this is about more than a party. It is about signaling. It is about the kind of life we are building. The people we need to connect with will be at places like Willow Creek." He had deferred a confused look on his face that he later shrugged off to me as her knowing the social side of things better. Then came the guest list. Jeremy wanted to invite his childhood friend Ben, a mechanic with a heart of gold and tattoos covering his arms. They had been friends since sandbox days. Cassandra was sweetly, firmly immovable. "My love, it is about cohesion and guest experience. He would not know anyone, and his aesthetic is so very different from our other guests. He would feel out of place, and we would be worrying about him all night." It was a masterclass in exclusion, dressed as compassion. It stung deeply. Ben was like a second son to me. The most telling fracture, however, came on a Tuesday morning over coffee in my sunlit kitchen. The conversation had been about window treatments for their new apartment. Then out of nowhere, Cassandra set her cup down with a precise click. "Thelma, I have been thinking about practicalities. Regarding Walter's inheritance, do you happen to know the exact timeline for the probate to fully clear? And is it structured as a direct transfer to Jeremy? Or are there trusts or stipulations attached to the disbursement?" The questions were so specific, so financial, so devoid of the sentimental haze that should surround a wedding. I had blinked a piece of my scone turning to ash in my mouth. I am not entirely sure of the legal specifics, dear. The lawyer handles all that." She had waved a hand a little too quickly. Of course, just thinking about our joint account logistics and long-term tax planning. So tedious, I know. Later, when I tentatively mentioned my discomfort to Jeremy, he had taken my hands. "Mom, she is under a lot of pressure. Her family is expectant. She just wants everything to be perfect. For us." He looked at me with such pleading love, begging me to love her too, to not be an obstacle. So I did what mothers have done for centuries. I swallowed my doubts. I told myself I was becoming a cliché, a jealous woman who could not cut the cord. I buried my unease under layers of guilt and self-reproach. Now let me take you back to that cool shadowed hallway. The door to the bridal suite was open, just a sliver, a golden band of light cutting across the dark Persian runner. I had taken 2 steps toward it, intending to offer some last-minute words of encouragement, a final maternal blessing, when her voice stopped me cold. It was not the warm, modulated tone I was used to. It was flat, analytical, and carried a chilling note of boredom. She was on the phone, and she thought she was utterly alone. I know. Just a few more hours of this performance, she said with a sigh that spoke of immense inconvenience, not bridal nerves. It is all a procedural formality. Once the money hits the joint account, and everything is legally cemented, that should be 6 to 8 weeks after the marriage certificate is filed, I will start the proceedings. Jeremy is beautifully naive. He will be devastated, of course, but he will not suspect a thing. He thinks in straight lines. And the mother, Thelma, is just a trusting old woman, wrapped up in her little bakery world and fairy tale notions. She is no threat. There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end, then a low, confident laugh that held no joy, only triumph. Yes, the plan remains perfectly on track. I will file for divorce within the year. We are in a community property state. I will walk away with half. It is more than enough capital for a very, very comfortable fresh start. A new name, a new city, a life built on my terms finally. The floor beneath my feet seemed to liquefy. The rich, floral scent in the air turned cloying and sickly like the perfume of a funeral home. My hands flew out, gripping the dark wooden wainscoting to keep my knees from buckling. A white-hot rage, a devastating sorrow for my son, a visceral sense of betrayal. It all crashed over me in a nauseating wave. My every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed to throw open that door, to tear the pearl-studded veil from her meticulously styled hair, to scream the truth into the polished silence. But my body did not move. A strange glacial calm began seeping into my veins, a survival mechanism I did not know I possessed. It pushed the panic and the heat aside, leaving a cold, clear clarity. This was not the moment. A scene here would make me the villain, the hysterical, possessive mother ruining her son's wedding day. He would not believe me, not here surrounded by her perfect production. He would see only my disruption, not her deception. My intervention would fail, and I would lose him. I took one deliberate step back, then another. My breath was shallow and silent. I turned my satin shoes, making no sound on the carpet, and I walked away. I did not interrupt. I did not warn a single soul. I just listened. And in that terrible sacred listening, I decided exactly what I had to do. The battle would not be fought today in a hallway. It would be waged later on ground of my choosing, with weapons she would not expect. Walking back out into the blinding sunlight of the garden ceremony site was like stepping onto a brightly lit stage in a play whose script had just been revealed as a monstrous lie. I pasted on a smile, feeling the muscles of my face strain with the effort. My best friend Marlene, who owned the local flower shop and was responsible for the stunning arrangements, caught my eye from across the lawn. She raised a subtle eyebrow, a silent question mark. I gave the tiniest shake of my head, my eyes warning her off. The string quartet began to play. Jeremy took his place under the floral arch. His hands clasped his face, turned toward the aisle with an expression of such hopeful, tender love that it was a physical pain in my chest. Then the doors opened, and Cassandra appeared. She was a vision in sculpted white silk, a portrait of elegant perfection, my mother's handkerchief clutched in her hand. Every step she took down the aisle felt like a lie, given physical form. She floated toward him, her eyes locked on his, with what I could now see was not love, but a calculated, predatory tenderness. The Reverend, a kindly man named Reverend Clark, began to speak. "Do you, Cassandra, take Jeremy to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold for better or for worse?" Her "I do" was clear bright and rang with a hollow confidence. I heard the cold transactional echo from the hallway underneath it. When Jeremy slid the simple platinum band onto her finger, his hands were trembling with genuine emotion. Hers were steady as stone. When they kissed a practiced picture-perfect kiss, I had to look down at my own hands, clenched white in my lap. The applause that rippled through the crowd felt like a collective unwitting participation in a fraud. At the reception, I became a ghost at the feast watching her. I saw how her dazzling, photogenic smile for the well-wishers would vanish the millisecond she turned away, replaced by a placid, detached expression, like an actor dropping character between takes. I watched her steer Jeremy by the elbow, away from a group of his laughing college friends, and toward a cluster of her important contacts, a venture capitalist, a magazine editor. During the family portraits, she positioned herself firmly at the center of every configuration. As the photographer fussed with lighting, I saw my moment. I moved calmly. I walked over, placed a firm, steadying hand on Jeremy's shoulder, and gently but irrevocably pulled him a half-step toward me. "A little more this way, sweetheart. The light is better on your face," I said, my voice soft, but leaving no room for negotiation. Cassandra was edged slightly out of the core family frame. It was a small, silent declaration of territory. She shot me a quick, sharp glance, a flicker of confusion and annoyance in her eyes, before recomposing her smile into something even brighter. Inside, I was screaming, but on the outside, I was just Thelma, the proud, slightly teary, eternally reliable mother of the groom. It was the hardest and most necessary performance of my life. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my scrubbed pine kitchen table, the same table where Jeremy had done his homework, where Michael and I had shared countless meals, the heart of my real, unvarnished life. The silence of the house was a heavy mantle around my shoulders. The initial paralyzing hurt had over those long dark hours crystallized into a sharp, diamond-hard resolve. This would not stand. I would not let her hollow out my son's heart and spirit, and I would not let her plunder a legacy meant to give him a foundation. She had planned a financial heist, but she was stealing his trust, his joy, his faith in people. At 7 in the morning, as the first birds began to sing, I called Marlene. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy. "Thelma, is everything all right?" "No," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "It is not. I need you to come over. I need to tell you a story, and then I need your help to write a different ending." I told her everything from the first tiny doubt to the cold, clear words in the hallway. There was no hysteria, just the grim recitation of facts. Marlene listened, her face growing pale, then flushed with a quiet, furious anger. When I finished, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand, her grip strong from years of hauling buckets of flowers. "That viper," she whispered. Then, "What do you need, Thelma?" "A plan," I said. A smart, patient, airtight plan. We met at her flower shop later, surrounded by the earthy, honest sense of soil and greenery. Our strategy was built not on emotion, but on patience and precision. First and most crucially, absolute silence. Telling Jeremy in the raw, immediate aftermath would backfire catastrophically. He was in the loved-up haze of a new marriage, a state of chemical and emotional blindness. He would defend her, see me as a threat, and it would drive a wedge between us that Cassandra could exploit and widen. I had to protect my relationship with my son first, because that was the channel through which any real help would eventually flow. Second evidence, I had to be smarter, quieter. I would become the most supportive, doting, unthreatening mother-in-law imaginable. I would kill her with a kindness so thick it would suffocate her suspicion. I would make her feel so secure, so victorious, that she might grow careless, might let another damning comment slip in my presence. Third legal armor. Marlene knew a family law attorney, a woman named Susan Vance, who had helped her sister through a nasty custody battle. "She is a shark," Marlene said, "but she is a shark with a heart of gold. She hates bullies." I met Susan in her understated professional office 2 days later. I played her the voice memo I had recorded on my phone the moment I reached the safety of my car after the wedding, my voice shaking as I recounted verbatim every word I had heard. Susan listened, her expression granite. She explained the cold mechanics of the law. In our state, an inheritance was considered separate property unless it was commingled with marital assets, like depositing it into a joint bank account. Once that happened, it could be argued as community property. Cassandra's plan was not just evil, it was legally astute, which made it all the more despicable. Then Susan leaned forward, her eyes sharp. There is a way to slam that door shut before she even gets a finger in it. A trust. If Jeremy were to place the inheritance into an irrevocable trust before it is commingled with specific allowable purposes, like purchasing a primary residence or funding education, it remains definitively separate. It would also require his signature and a trustee to manage distributions. A trust. It was a legal fortress. It was also a test. If Cassandra's intentions were pure, she should have no issue with protecting Jeremy's legacy for their mutual long-term future. If they were not, it would force her hand. Susan agreed to draft the preliminary documents, a suggestion from the family's financial advisor. Now I had the key to the fortress. The far more delicate task was getting my son to willingly walk inside it without him ever knowing he was being led away from a cliff. The dinner invitation was for a simple Friday night, just the three of us. I cooked Jeremy's favorite meal pot roast with carrots and onions, slow cooked until tender, the way Michael had taught me. The familiar, comforting smell of it usually filled me with peace. That night, it felt like the aromatics before a siege. They arrived Cassandra looking radiant in cashmere, her arm possessively linked through Jeremy's. I was a portrait of grandmotherly warmth, fussing over them, pouring wine, asking about their new apartment. I let the conversation flow naturally, waiting for the right moment. It came over dessert, my homemade apple pie with a lattice crust. I took a small sip of water, buying a second of courage. You know, I began my tone conversational. I had a lovely chat with old Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, this week. We were finally going over the last of the paperwork for Walter's estate. Jeremy looked up from his pie, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Everything all right, Mum?" "No problems." "Oh, no problems at all," I said, smiling reassuringly. In fact, he had what I think is a brilliant idea. He said, instead of just having that sum transferred into your joint checking account, where it might just sit or get nibbled away by daily life, we could set up a trust. A professional would manage and invest it. The core of the money would be protected, grown even, and you could use the earnings or specific distributions for big life-building things, a real down payment on a house when you are ready or future children's college funds. It is a smarter, safer way to honor Walter's wish to set you both up for a secure life. Jeremy's brow furrowed in thought, not anger, a trust that actually makes a lot of sense. It is responsible. Walter would have liked that, the practical side of it. He turned to Cassandra. "What do you think, honey?" Her fork laden with a piece of pie froze halfway to her mouth. All the color drained from her face, leaving her expertly applied makeup stark against her skin. A trust. The word came out brittle. That seems incredibly restrictive and legally cumbersome. Jeremy, that is our capital. We should have control over it, together, now. What if we want to invest in a business, or take a year to travel the world? We would have to go begging to some trustee for permission. Her reaction was too sharp, too visceral. Jeremy's frown deepened. "Sweetheart, it is not going anywhere. It is just a different financial vehicle. It is still for us. It is a vehicle that locks me out." She snapped, her voice rising before she forcibly smoothed it into a strained calm. "I mean, it locks us out of immediate decisions. This is our life, our money. We should be in the driver's seat." I kept my voice gentle, a soft probe. My phone lying screen down on the table was silently recording. I had checked the laws. Our state was a one-party consent state. "Cassie, you sound so very anxious about this all of a sudden. Is there a specific urgent plan you have for this money that setting up a trust would completely derail?" Something in her snapped. The carefully constructed facade crumbled under the pressure of thwarted greed. "My plan is not to be controlled by a bunch of outdated legal documents," she nearly shouted, shoving her chair back. "I did not go through all of this, the wedding playing the perfect doting wife to you, and the sweet daughter-in-law to her, to be handed an allowance like a child. That money is as much mine as it is yours. I earned it." The word earned hit the quiet kitchen like a gunshot. Jeremy stared at her, his face a slow-moving catastrophe of dawning horror. Playing the perfect wife, he whispered the words barely audible. Cassandra realized her catastrophic error. Panic flashed in her eyes, wild and feral, before it solidified into a cold, defiant glare. She looked from his shattered expression to my calm, knowing one. The mask was off, and she saw no point in wearing it anymore. "You," she hissed at me, the venom pure and undiluted. "You heard me that day in the hallway. I knew I felt someone there. I knew it. I did not deny it." I held her gaze, and then I slowly, deliberately turned my full attention to my son. My eyes, I let them show every ounce of the pain I had been carrying for him. "Jeremy, my love, I need to tell you exactly what I heard outside her dressing room, just minutes before you promised her your life." And I told him. I did not paraphrase. I did not embellish. I recited as if from a cursed script, the cold calculating words about the performance, the timeline, his naivety, my insignificance, the planned divorce, and the comfortable fresh start. He listened, his breath coming in short, ragged pulls, his face crumbling piece by precious piece until there was nothing left but raw, bewildered hurt. When I finished, the kitchen was a tomb. He looked at Cassandra, his eyes begging for a denial, any denial. Is it true she did not bother with lies? The contempt was now naked. "You are a sweet, simple man, Jeremy. A very sweet man. And yes, it was always about the money. The trust fund was the goal. You were just the necessary key." She stood up, dropped her linen napkin onto her half-eaten pie, as if discarding garbage, and without another word, without a single glance back at the ruin she left behind, she walked out of my house, out of his life, and into the night. The silence she left in her wake was more profound, more echoing than any scream could ever have been. In the brutal, pragmatic weeks that followed my recording and my detailed witness testimony were our most powerful assets. Cassandra's own lawyer, a weary-looking man, advised her to settle with extreme haste. There was to be no dramatic fight for half of the estate, no drawn-out court battle. She received a single lump sum payment, a fraction of what she had planned to take, in exchange for signing an annulment and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. The wedding was legally erased, as if it never happened. The relief was a physical sensation, a loosening of a vice that had been clamped around my chest for months. But the relief was not the end. It was merely the end of the beginning. The real, slow, arduous work was Jeremy's healing. He was a ghost of himself. He moved back into his old room for a while, the room still holding echoes of his teenage self. He did not talk much. He would spend hours staring out the window, or he would come down to the bakery before dawn and knead bread dough with a fierce, punishing intensity, his jaw clenched, his eyes distant. I did not press him. I did not offer platitudes. I was simply steadfastly there. I left a bowl of soup on the counter. I made a pot of his favorite chai. I sat with him in the living room, not speaking, just sharing the space, letting the quiet companionship be a net beneath him. He asked me once, his voice scraped raw, "Why didn't you stop it, Mom? Why did you let me walk down that aisle?" I took his hand, his flour-dusted, capable hand. "Because you had to see it for yourself, Jeremy. If I had stopped it, a part of you would have always wondered. You would have romanticized what could have been. You might have resented me, and you would have never seen the true calculation in her eyes. I could not protect you from that particular pain. My job was not to prevent the fall. It was to be standing right here on solid ground to help you back up when you landed." He did not say anything, just squeezed my hand so tight it hurt. Slowly, achingly slowly, he began to come back. He worked with Susan Vance to formally establish the Walter J. Mitchell Legacy Trust. He used part of the first authorized distribution, not for himself, but to expand and renovate my bakery. He designed a beautiful light-filled addition himself, a proper office, a gleaming new kitchen annex with a state-of-the-art oven and a small cozy seating area by a fireplace. We renamed it Thelma and Sons Hearth. It was his way of reinvesting in something tangible, honest, and rooted in love, of literally rebuilding a foundation. It has been a year now. The bakery is thriving, busier than ever, the hearth in the name, truly reflecting the warmth within. Last week I was frosting a carrot cake when I glanced over at the new seating area. Jeremy was there talking to Lena, the soft-spoken librarian from the branch down the street, who comes in every Tuesday for a sourdough loaf and a latte with an extra shot of cinnamon. He was leaning against the fireplace mantel, smiling. It was not his old, dazzled smile. It was slower, quieter, more genuine. A smile that reached his eyes. She was listening to him describe the challenges of a new restoration project. Her head tilted, her expression one of kind, intelligent attention. There were no calculations in her gaze, no hidden agendas. Just a quiet human connection unfolding in its own time. I turned back to my cake, a different kind of warmth spreading through my chest, one that had nothing to do with the ovens. The silence I chose that fateful afternoon was not complicity. It was not weakness. It was the deepest, most agonizing form of love I knew how to give. It was the space I deliberately carved out of the chaos, a space filled not with inaction, but with fierce, strategic patience so I could build a bridge for my son. A bridge made of evidence and timing of legal documents and unwavering presence so he could cross over the treacherous waters of betrayal and find his way back to the solid, honest ground of who he was always meant to be. So that is my story. It was the quietest I have ever been, and in that quiet, I found a voice more powerful than any shout. I would love to hear from you now. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew speaking up immediately would cause more harm than good, where you had to choose strategic patience over immediate confrontation? How did you find the strength to wait? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your stories help us all feel less alone. If this narrative of quiet strength resonated with you, please give this video a like. It tells me these conversations about difficult choices are important. And if you want to join a community that values real nuanced stories about family resilience and finding your power in unexpected ways, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Sharing this channel with someone who might need to hear it is one of the kindest things you can do. Thank you truly for listening to my story today. Wherever you are in your own journey, whatever difficult silence or necessary word you are grappling with, I wish you the clarity to see the path, the wisdom to choose your moment, and the courage to follow through. Take good care of yourselves and each other.